Okay, greetings, scholars. We are going to start chapter 2. Chapter 2 deals with exploration. We'll start out with exploration in general, then we will talk about European exploration, then we'll get to Portuguese exploration and move into Spanish exploration, and then cover a very important topic, especially with regard to the textbook called the Columbian Exchange. So, let me check this real quick. Trying to make sure I'm in frame. Now, exploration, this age of European exploration. Around the mid to late 1400s, Europeans start exploring. Now, lots of reasons for exploration, lots of reasons to go looking. Primarily, it's because you want something, is why exploration normally takes place. If you've got all the food you need and you're secure in your environment and everything is comfortable, there's no real reason to explore, except for that notion of that just a minor percentage of the population would have about expanding their knowledge base into the unknown. That really doesn't sound like too much of the driving force behind these guys. They were looking for stuff. They were looking for stuff. We'll talk about why and all those things as we deal with this now. Now, Europeans on their way to North America. The Spanish aren't the first to discover, quote unquote, North America. Actually, around 1000 AD, the Norse had already made its way to North America, to Newfoundland. You're familiar with the stories of Leif Erikson, Eric the Red, and all this that happened around 1000 AD. These Norse settlements in the New World were a long time before, over 400 years before Columbus decides he's going to sail west. Now, Europeans' interests were not in the west, but in the east. They were interested in the things that they could get from the east because Europeans had developed a taste for luxuries that were only found in the Middle and Far East. They had encountered these things during the Crusades and all of this. When they get back to Europe, they want those things to be brought back. And so it creates sort of this market, usually fulfilled by, I guess sometime around the 1200s, the Polo family, Marco Polo, his father and his uncle, are going to travel up and down the Silk Road during this period. And the Italian city-states are going to tie up the trade from the east into Europe. Okay? It's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. There's still overland travel. The places that they have to travel still Islamic strongholds, and sometimes it was tenuous, sometimes it was not. However, it'd be extremely profitable if you could have a successful trip to the Far East and bring stuff back to Europe. You could be extremely, extremely wealthy because of it. And so, it's what's going to start driving this European exploration, the things that are in the East. Okay, we'll talk about Mediterranean trade and European expansion, and then we'll talk about the Portuguese. I do want to say a little bit about the Norse and their trips. The Norse are from Scandinavia. Let's see, I'm looking for a pencil. I don't think I've got a pencil. Norse are from Scandinavia, this region up through here. Okay? It's the people from Norway and Sweden, the Geats and the Danes and all of these people. Normally, what these Vikings, as we normally refer to them, would do is they would get on their boats and it'd make their boats really scary, like dragons. And they would get huge axes and hammers and they would invade down into northern Europe, right? Because basically everybody in the ancient world, everybody during this time period 9 times out of 10, you're a farmer. Even the Norse are farmers. It's just a problem in Scandinavia, very, very short growing season. So what's going to happen is they are going to invade into northern Europe in an attempt to find foodstuffs, stuffs that they can use to supplement their meager lifestyles back in the Norseland, in the Finland, in all of these areas in Scandinavia. Now, our normal understanding of these Vikings is that they're bloodthirsty barbarians and rape and pillage and plunder and all of this stuff. That's the kind of mystique that they wanted. See, when these Vikings would come and they would raid a village, they weren't trying to destroy the village because they needed to come back next year. And so when they would come and they would pillage, their scary facade helps them accomplish their task. Around 800 AD, Charlemagne is going to sort of unify this whole region, and Charlemagne's going to make a concerted effort to put a stop to the invasion into Frankish territory. And so what these Geats and these Danes and these Swedes, what they're going to do is they're going to become what they refer to as far travelers, which is the Scandinavian word Viking. And they're going to travel out, and the first place they're hit is the northern shore of England. There are still, to this day, Scandinavian outposts, Scandinavian towns on the northern shores of England. Most of you who've had world literature, English literature, you've read a story called Beowulf. Beowulf isn't an English story, it's a story about these Geats and these Danes and these Swedes. It's these monasteries in northern England become associated with these Vikings. They continue to search for farmlands and resources until they've hit Iceland and then Greenland, and then eventually they'll hit Newfoundland. Okay? They don't have a lot of contact with the rest of Europe because they maintain this facade, they maintain this caricature of bloodthirsty Vikings, and so people aren't really in an information exchange kind of mood with these guys. And so even though the Vikings know that there's a massive landmass to the west, the rest of Europe doesn't know. The rest of Europe doesn't know. I just wanted to explain that because it's Columbus has a great idea, but he just didn't understand the two big problems in his way. Now, I like this map. You can download the PowerPoint and print this map off, because this map gives us the primary explorations, the early explorations, especially the Portuguese explorations, when they find out that they can go around the Cape of Good Hope and make a shot towards India. So it's got these major explorations, plus it has Columbus's first journeys, first voyage, and then also has Magellan's trip to circumnavigate the globe. So I really do like this map. It's a good map. Now, during the time of the 1400s, Europe is the green. Everything that's in green on this map, this is what Europe knew about. Okay, not a lot of the interior Africa. Most of what we would call today northern China, Mongolia, Russia, Mongolia, and they knew nothing of North and South America or Australia. Now, from the 12th century to the 15th century, trade was dominated, controlled by the Italian city-states. I think I've got another map here in a minute that will illustrate this. The other countries feel the grip because the Italians are going to bleed them dry for these resources that they're bringing to them. That's only one of the reasons that the countries are going to seek other routes to the east. You also have, oh, here it is. Most of the trade routes that are known about in red, they all come from all over Asia and then bottleneck right here in Constantinople and Alexandria. And from here, the Italian city-states takes over all of the trade, and the rest of Europe has to pay the price to have access to all of that materials. Okay? The kinds of things that the Italians are bringing back: spices, silk, carpets, ivory, gold, from places like Persia and Asia Minor, India, Africa, and China. Now, the Silk Road, this map, let me go back to this map. Come on, clicker. There we go. This Silk Road that especially Marco Polo and his family would travel, this Silk Road was known by the Romans. Matter of fact, the Romans used to get silk from China to bring back to Rome. Very, very expensive luxury. The Romans called the land from where it just came, they called it silk. Kind of in the same way that we call the fine white porcelain that we originally got from there, we call it China, because it comes from China. Now, we're after these kinds of things. That's what we want, and that's what the exploration is all about. Finding routes to get that stuff back to Europe, okay, from all of these different places. There are other reasons, conquest and building of empire. As we see the Spanish do their work, we'll be able to talk more about that. There is also the Black Plague. It's during this period that some people would rather jump on a ship and leave the safety of land, which at that point wasn't safe because of the plague. And so they would do their best to stay away. There's stories of a German monk named Erasmus who got a special dispensation from the Pope so that he could move whenever he could, go from university to university to university whenever he wanted to. He didn't have to stay cloistered in his monastery. And every time he would find out that a case of plague was discovered in the city, Erasmus would pack up and move to the next city. He winds up in England with Henry VIII during this period, during some of this period, with Thomas More, when Thomas More and he were both colleagues in England. So the plague has people traveling and moving and going to other places. If any of you have read the Canterbury Tales, many of the Canterbury Tales are plague stories, plague pilgrimage. Let's see, there's also the hope of gaining land. There's new lands to be had, and if you could stake your claim on these lands, you would become wealthy. And there will be certain scientific and technological advances that are going to make this kind of stuff possible, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Now, early exploration. The Italians had overland travel tied up and in the Mediterranean, and they guarded it. They protected it jealously, to the point of ships firing upon one another in the Mediterranean. Now, Portugal. Portugal's a small country. It's tiny. Some people would even call it itty-bitty. But Portugal's going to spend enormous resources on exploration technologies. They are going to open schools of navigation and utilizing the newest technologies to make their navigators and pilots the best possible. Okay? Now, they are in a unique position. They had helped the Spanish monarchs drive the Muslims out of the Cordoban Caliphate back across the Iberian Peninsula back to North Africa. And then in 1415, this turning point for Portugal as they helped to capture Quechua, which is a city on the other side of the Straits of Gibraltar, so that now the Portuguese have access in and out of the Mediterranean Sea without having conflict. And so this is going to be a big deal for Portugal. Okay, even though it's small, they've got the blessing of both the king and the pope. Okay. This is a picture, a painting of Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator. Now his name's kind of a misnomer. Henry never sails anywhere. However, he's kind of like Bill Gates. He collects this sort of navigational technology. He's the one who pushes for these schools of navigation. Okay, he's sort of the techie of the time period. His dates are from 1415 to 1460. He expands. He realizes that they can't compete with the Italians. They can't go head to head with the Italians. So what Henry's going to do is he's going to expand the types of products that they trade for, and he's going to expand the areas, expand the locations, and push his explorers. They're going to start exploring outside into the Atlantic Ocean. They're going to the Azores and the Canary Islands, and they're going to start exploring the bulge of Africa, right around the big bulge of on the western side, on West Africa. And he's going to push his explorers, push them further and further and further. They're going to come back with a cargo full of brand new stuff that they bring back. And Henry says, "Wow, how far did you get?" And they'll explain it, and he'll ask, "Well, what was 10 leagues down the coast?" And they're like, "Well, we couldn't go 10 leagues down the coast." And he would say, "I wonder what you would have found if you would only gone 10 more leagues." So he pushes these guys to go further and further and further on these expeditions. And it starts to pay off. They start finding all kinds of things off the coastal, out in the islands off the Atlantic, and then the coastal regions of West Africa. They start bringing all kinds of stuff back for trade. And they have the blessing of the king and the pope. I mean, he is the prince, and the pope recognizes Portugal's claims simply because they had helped the Spanish monarchs defeat the Cordoban Caliphate. Now, the reason they're able to go out into the open ocean is because of this technology. It's a ship called the caravel. Okay, here's with triangle sails, and here's a different caravel with square sails. Okay, it's a wide bottom ship, right, which displaces enough water that it can handle the turbulent seas. Okay, the Mediterranean isn't as turbulent as out onto the open ocean. And these ships, you can sort of see in the water log, when the ships are full, the water comes all the way up to this water line, and when the ships are emptied out, they still displace enough water to keep them well afloat. They're going to use these ships because the way it displaces water, they're able to sail these ships up wide-mouthed rivers as far as they possibly can, so they can get stuff and then bring it back out. Okay, so it's a good technology. Now, a second trick that the Portuguese use is it's really sort of a common sense kind of thing. When you go to the beach and it's nighttime and you're walking along the beach, the wind is blowing off the water. Wait. It's been a while since I've been to the beach. It's blowing one direction. We'll put it that way. It's blowing in one direction. When the sun comes up the next morning, the wind changes and it's blowing the other way. Okay? For the most part. And so what's going to happen is the Portuguese are going to start this practice of hopscotching. They're going to use the prevailing winds when the winds are blowing out, when the winds are blowing back in, and they're going to bounce all their way around because they're going to make faster time. They're going to be able to move and maneuver quickly. And everywhere they land, see these little orange patches, everywhere they land, they're going to establish trading posts. From these trading posts, they're going to go to the interior and find items, fruits and foods and gold and precious stones and whatever else they can find to take back to Europe. Okay? And they will guard these holdings in the same way that the Italians are guarding the trade in the Mediterranean. So the Portuguese are going to do the same thing the Italians do. Now, again, here's this map. The two really, really important Portuguese sailors that we need to talk about are Vasco da Gama and Bartholomew Diaz. Vasco da Gama and Bartholomew Diaz. Diaz is going to sail hopscotch around until he gets to the Cape of Good Hope, and Diaz is going to come around the Cape of Good Hope and recognize that he can make his way to India. So does he go to India? No. This is one other thing that Prince Henry had taught them. Henry had told his navigators, the only thing more important than a cargo full of materials is information. When you find something new, when you find out some new information, you bring it back and disseminate it with the rest of us, and then we will go in mass. And so as Bartholomew Diaz in 1487 is making his way around Africa, once he finds he can come around the Cape of Good Hope, he turns around and heads straight back to Lisbon. 10 years later, 1497, Vasco da Gama is going to make his trip. And he's going to hopscotch around the East Africa and go straight to India. Okay? Now, the two dates are interesting. The two dates. The first is in 1487, and the second is 1497. There is an important issue of exploration that takes place in between those two things. It's when Columbus sails, 1492. Okay? Columbus had been a Portuguese sailor, but Columbus is not going to make the trip under the Portuguese flag. He's going to make the trip under the Spanish flag, and we'll get to Columbus in a minute. Now, these two guys, Bartholomew Diaz, in 1488, he discovers the Cape of Good Hope. Realizing that he can make it around Africa, he goes straight back to Lisbon so that he can share this information and they can plan a massive expedition to go straight to India. 10 years later, Vasco da Gama is going to set up, and he is going to take a pack of ships and make this first trip to India. He'll arrive there in 1498. When he comes home, when he gets back to Lisbon with all these ships full of the spices and the porcelains and the silks and all the things that can be had in India that up to this point had only been the preview of the Italians, this is a windfall for Portugal. Okay? There's no middlemen here. They don't have to worry about, there's no markups. There's no dangerous overland travel. And most importantly, there's no Italians to have to contend with. Portugal sees itself in first place. It sees itself in a very, very good position. And they are going to take advantage of this for a while. Now, we'll talk about Columbus quickly. We only have a couple more minutes. Actually, let's. What we'll do is we'll end this here, and then we'll start discussing Columbus and the Columbian Exchange after we finished. This first part of exploration is merely setting the stage. It's showing us what the Europeans are after. Okay, they're not setting out to prove that the Earth was round. They're not setting out to necessarily find new lands. What they're looking for is a way to get stuff to bring back, stuff to sell, stuff to put on an open market. Okay. So when we start the second one, the next one, we'll start talking about Columbus, his exploration, his training, and what all of that leads